episode number 14 of Books and Beyond webinar series. Hello to our great guests today, Rich and Jim. And to our audience, I see we have some people kind of joining in, so we can also, while we talk about the housekeeping rules, we can let people make their way to the webinar. As you all know, we have the session is recorded, and you have access to it right away after we're done with the discussion on our YouTube channel and also on our PMO Leader website. Another good thing to think about is for whomever is reporting PDUs, you can use these webinars and you can self-report. And this is episode 14, so you can report this one, but you can also check all the previous episodes. And then if you think about it, it's 14 hours worth of PDUs. Of course, more important is the value and the insights that come out of these contents. And this is great. So if you're not a member of the PMO Leader community, you won't be able to see these webinars, the recordings. So go ahead and subscribe. It's free, and you have access to great content like this. Other than that, my name is Thinka or Elinka, whichever you'd like. I'm your host as usual. And today we will be talking for the next hour or so about great meetings and how that builds great teams with two exceptional people here, Rich and Jim.
And
Oh yeah, no, yeah, you are. Welcome. Thank you for accepting to come here today and have this discussion with us. And we're very much looking forward to this conversation. Would you like to give a few words to the audience about yourselves?
go ahead.
Sure.
We can.
Okay. I'm next to you on the Brady Bunch images here, so I'll go next. So yeah, Rich Maltzman. Could I cut off the ARD there on my name there? Anyway, Rich Maltzman. I have been in project management for a long time. Engineer by trade, but 40 years of experience in mostly telecom, and then alongside that, project management. Both in practice and in education. So I've been lately, last few years, master lecturer at Boston University's Metropolitan College. And that's all I'll say for now.
Okay, I'm Jim Stewart. We're both PMPs, Rich and I, but we didn't manage to put that in our profile there. I've been independent since about 2001. I don't have as much project management experience as my father, Rich, but I do have quite a bit of experience in project management. Probably about 25 years project management. Waterfall traditionally, I would say in three areas: IT, because I used to be an IT network engineer; pharmaceutical, I'm working at a pharma right now; and financial. And this is our third book, or my second book with Rich. I also have a novel I published that no one will ever read up on Amazon. And currently, as an independent, spending a lot of time working at a pharma doing an agile transformation with all scientists. And in terms of the topic, meetings, I think Rich and I say in the book, we're both teachers. So we run hundreds of meetings, but classes are meetings. And there's a similarity in running them we hadn't even thought about till we started writing the book. So we are veterans of many meetings. So given that, I'll shut up and allow you to run this meeting, and we'll go from there.
So we met today to talk about meetings. That is that is opportune, and I think that is a topic that I don't know who wouldn't be interested in learning how to make great meetings, especially nowadays when we have to attend so many, and we have to keep our focus also and stop multitasking. I know I'm guilty of that. Not right now, though. This is, I promise, you have my full attention on this one. So it sounds like you to have it sounds like you to have a long history of authoring books, and teaching and all the good stuff that some of us aspire to do one day. But we can focus, maybe start the meeting and focus on the current project, this current book. And how did it all start?
Well, may I do that, Rich? Because this germinated from a different. Here's how this really started. Rich and I worked as consultants to a woman who ran a life sciences company, still does. She consults to hospitals, pharmaceuticals. That's where I got into that business. And Rich and I did a variety of things for her, taught for her, wrote courseware for her, did consulting for her, etc. And she is a very dynamic Finnish woman, and she is a great facilitator. And she holds. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from her, as a matter of fact. And she was holding these big, multi-day meetings for farmers where they would plan their schedule. They come out of a 2-day meeting with a schedule, a risk register, issues, etc. I was impressed by that fact. So one day I was talking to another colleague of mine. I used to teach at Brandeis University, and I was thinking about writing a book. And I came up with a couple of ideas. What about that thing you do? And he worked for her too. What about that work you do with her about running those meetings? I said, okay, what about it? He said, I would read that book. I said, okay. So Rich had been writing books with other people, and I started thinking, maybe he doesn't like me. He's not writing a book with me. And so I approached him and said, basically, Rich, do you like me? He said, well, sometimes. But that aside, I said, how about a book with me? It took me a while I think initially, Rich, to get the idea across, maybe my bad on what it was. But once Rich got the idea, he liked it. We did the first book. Even after writing the first book, I thought, we didn't bring enough agile stuff in there, but it was focused around these big, there it is, these big, long, still out there, long meetings. It was fine. So, did its job. But then, so that was done. And then it would have been the only one, but that publisher went out of business. He says, I'm going to return the book to you or the rights to it or whatever. And Rich and I said, well, why don't we find, and give Rich credit. He found both publishers. We found another publisher and updated the book. It's not just that it's more agile, it is, but it has less of a focus on the 2-day planning meeting and more on meetings in general. I want to say one thing before I'll turn it over to Rich on that. It's an interesting thing because what I'm discovering when I'm working in the agile transformation, it still comes down to meeting management. There are meetings, there are planning meetings, there are sprint reviews. We have one new Scrum Master who is learning it, and she's not a good at meeting facilitator. Her meetings are boring and they're dry. And I talked to her coach. I say, it's meeting management 101. It's not an agile thing. So I don't care if you're using agile or waterfall or a bunch of spreadsheets. You still have to know how to run a meeting. And nothing in agile or waterfall teaches you how to run a meeting. So I just want to throw it out there before I forgot that. Rich, if you want to expand or
So I had been working on books on sustainability and project management, and I still have that as a passion. And then Jim came to me with this idea, and so we did come up with this book. You can see this. It was Maven House, which is Jim Pennypacker. Some of you may know him. He used to review books for PM Journal and PMI Network, I believe. Yeah, and so we wrote this book. We got Dr. Harold Kersner. Most people should know that name to write us our forward, and it's good. It's a good book. But as Jim said, when Maven House decided to retire, right? Maven House was a one-person company. He said, you can do whatever you want with the content. It's yours. So we decided to refresh it, as Jim said, add agile. We even added AI into this. In fact, frankly, we just asked AI to write the book for us.
Right, exactly. And so
it just did it. We just said, please write a book about meetings, and we're done. No, of course not. Of course not. But we do mention, and not mention, but cover how AI may actually have an impact on meeting science, if you will, taking notes, tracking action items, things like this. And there are now all kinds of platforms. So we talk about that as well, and added agile. And we carried over one of the, I think, the better elements of the book, the popular elements of the book, which we could talk for a while, and that is meeting goblins. And the idea that just like when you get in a car, sometimes your personality changes. And, nice Alinka becomes nasty Alinka and cuts people off and maybe says a few choice words and uses a few choice gestures. A similar behavior change takes place, we think, when you enter a meeting room. And there are people who are not necessarily bullies who will tend to take over a meeting. And so we call these meeting goblins, and they're actually featured in the book. We actually they're on the cover. Well, I have to look carefully. You have to look carefully on the cover. They're actually shadows because they're built into us, and we don't necessarily know we have them. So that's one of the things here is, as a facilitator, you should know that these exist in your meeting attendees, and that, oh, by the way, you're just as prone to taking on these personalities yourself. So that's not the whole book, of course, but
I would tweak that a little bit to say this, Rich, that those tendencies are in people and they get exacerbated in a meeting. So, for example, some people are passive aggressive, some people are bullies, some people talk endlessly, and that's their modus operandi. That's the way they operate. And when they come to the meeting, what we discovered, Rich and I, one of the things that I've said all along is don't go to a meeting with the intention of having people like you. And too many people come in, they're not saying that to themselves, but they want the people in the room to like them. So therefore, if some guy charges off, I'll use guy and gal interchangeably, and talks for 10 minutes, they're thinking, to some level, I don't want to stop him because I want to be seen as a nice person. Meanwhile, the rest of the room is looking at you for leadership and saying, could you curtail this conversation? So you have to be a bit ruthless. I did this recently in a class. I teach PMP, as does Rich. I was teaching on a weekend. There's a woman in class who was very quiet in terms of talking, but we had gone for a break. We came back, and I was ready to start. She was turning around having a conversation with somebody, and I said, I forget exactly what I said. We had to get started. Oh, okay. I could have let her talk for 15 minutes, but it would have been to the detriment, and I literally had to interrupt her. I don't feel bad about that. I didn't yell at her, but I had to interrupt her and say, I'm sorry, but we have to get back on track. At that moment, her liking me or not liking me wasn't the issue. The issue is you have a meeting to get to, whether you're teaching or running it or whatever. And to Rich's point, and credit to him, he came up with the idea of goblins. And the woman who drew the goblins for us, also Christina Carlson, I think it is.
Yes, that's right.
Cover. And these people, you say, well, I can run a meeting with a bunch of nice people. Okay. What if you have a meeting with a strong-willed manager? What if you have a meeting with a bully? What if you have anybody can run an easy meeting? What if you have a meeting with somebody who talks too much, an interrupter, the naysayer, the it will never work guy or gal? That's what we get paid for when we run meetings, is to work with and around or whatever without demeaning those people. That's the trick, right, Rich? How do we call out a bully without making him feel worse? We don't dislike him or her. We dislike their behavior in the moment. And how do we change that?
Exactly. And I think you said one key thing you said, Jim, is the people in the meeting are looking to you for leadership, just like they are on the whole project. And that's another thing that we found here is that you have to remember when you're facilitating a meeting and running a project meeting, it's the same leadership skills, just like Jim said, taking control and refocusing the meeting without demeaning someone. That's the same kind of behavior that PMI is touting in the 7th edition PMBOK guide. Ways of working, that you have 18 other people in the meeting who are, rolling their eyes because you haven't taken charge. And to do that, you may have to temporarily be a little bit uncomfortable with one person, but they too will, they will want their chance to speak at the meeting. But it's again, the key word is leadership.
Right.
It's really the same kind of leadership you need to also convey back to your project. So we would assert, and I'll stop here. We do a lot of asserting. We would assert that this book is, although it's about meetings and great meetings build great teams, I think we could also have said great meetings build great leaders, because the skills that the book helps you gain through science, and we have some research in here, will translate to you in your project. So this isn't really just about meetings, although that's enough. We have a lot of meetings, like it or not.
And I would add that people are giving up their time to come to your meeting. I used to have a guy I
Mhm.
work with who would come to me and say, "What is the business reason for this meeting?" After I get annoyed about it, I thought, he's right. I have to justify this meeting in a sense to have him come to this. And people come, if say it's for an hour, and this woman that we're working with, or coaching her, she's a new scrum master, but also not really dynamic in running meetings. So she's got to be coached to run better meetings. Imagine those 2-day meetings. People were flying in from all over the world to meet. And we had this. And if we had run a lousy meeting, they say, and this guy is running my project. So we had to keep the meetings upbeat, moving along. That's what facilitation is all about. Intriguing, interesting, challenging, and provide what they came for. When they would leave at the end of it and think, I'd say, I'd never looked at a project like this. We have stickies on the wall, and we'd have issues over here and side discussions. So they would come for one thing, which was probably kicking and screaming to come out with whatever artifacts from the project. They would leave with those, but a greater understanding of the project. Some of the people had never met in person, side discussions about harmonization across pharmaceutical, and sort of a feeling of team camaraderie that they couldn't get, that you can't get by exchanging emails. It turns out, or texts. And
Right.
so, yes, it's leadership, but it's also you're not building a team necessarily when you're teaching. When you're running that kind of a meeting, if you can't do team building exercises, the meeting itself can sort of itself become that done well, or those can become that. And the person who can't run meetings, even if it's simple little things, quickly loses the respect of people. And I've seen it in person where people who talk uninterestingly, a phenomenon I've seen, you've probably seen it too, Rich. Be a person in the front of the room. Let's say you spoke and you were interesting. Another person comes up and they're rambling. All of a sudden, people in the crowd are talking to each other because they've sort of lost interest in what this person is saying, and they communicate to each other, and the person up front has lost control of the room. You can't lose control of the room. So
Right.
we talk about that as well.
Exactly.
But then that brings a good point. So your book addressed to project managers only, or anybody who would be, I guess, leading the meeting for us for a moment.
It's focused on there's no reason a non-project manager couldn't read it and get something from it. However, it's in our title, and Rich and I are project managers, so we didn't try to say you can run an executive. You can certainly use some of our techniques. I don't know if we'd be the first one they'd pick up off the shelf, but they certainly could get some ideas because everything is a
Right.
project these days.
Exactly. And actually, we don't use the word project manager in the title.
Right.
We avoided that. We call them project leaders. That's a whole separate topic. We could talk for a different hour about the idea that our title is wrong. Managers are usually supervisors. Managers have direct reports. Typically, project managers don't. The way to get influence and the way to get people to do project work when the team members are often in different organizations is you need to lead them. So
Right.
I've been promoting the idea of project leadership as opposed to project management. So to be a little bit semantic, we actually chose the word project leadership, project leaders and agilists.
Right.
But to Jim's point, absolutely, you could be an operations manager, a business analyst, an architect. You're still having meetings. You still do
Right.
project work.
Correct.
And oh, by
Or
the
they
way,
make
that
it to you.
yep. And
Or
oh,
they
by the
make
way,
it
that's
to you, and you got to hand them a copy, right? So
yeah, exactly. And also, there are projects that anyone runs, whether it's a rebuilding project in their home or
right.
an event like a wedding,
Right.
you'll have meetings. So this book, this book, I think, would be um, uh, appropriate for a wider audience. But by the same token, we should also say we weren't looking to sell 5 million copies. 4,200,006
Well,
would be great.
we that was the saga of our first book. It came out the same day as Michelle Obama's book, and she just clobbered us in sales. So we hope to have a window where no other book is released on the same day.
Well, we wrote to her and asked her to not release any
Don't put
new
your
books
sequel out the same day.
on the same day.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
So I
we have
mean,
she will need some guidance.
yeah, she's gonna win in that contest, no question.
Right.
But we do want to we did limit this because that's our area of expertise and that's where we can add value. And
Right.
really, this is about adding value.
Yeah. And the funny thing
No,
is,
but
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just sorry, I just wanted to say that I think you make a good point about the fact that you know, if a project manager or a project leader or a leader is the best individual suited to lead a meeting and to know how to lead a meeting, then anybody else who would take the stage even for a moment, where else would you find better resources to learn how to do that rather than in a project management book about
Yes.
how to lead great meetings, right? Because we assign that role to the project leader by default. But then,
Yes.
Jim, to your scenario earlier, when somebody takes over and they're just rambling and people lose interest, if
Mm-hmm.
that person is not the leader of the meeting, so it's just a person, attendee, who has business and talks about it,
Mm-hmm.
in that scenario, who do you think should be better suited to continue the leadership of the meeting? Would it be the project leader to step in and get the audience attention, or would it be that
Well,
person?
we're
Does that
assuming
make
the
sense?
project. That's a good question. Firstly, we're kind of assuming the project leader and the facilitator are one and the same person. So the person who's
Hmm.
running the project wants to demonstrate his or her skills at meeting management, i.e., leadership. But we do say in the book, if this isn't you, get yourself a facilitator. So, for example, why in the pharmaceutical situation was more my colleague and I running these meetings, and there was always a project manager because we knew how to do it, and he or she didn't. So in that case, it's exactly the scenario you described. We met with the sponsor, created artifacts up front. My partner and I ran the meeting as outside consultants, as a project manager learning. So if the person didn't feel comfortable taking back charge, she and I were running the meeting. It was up to us to corral it and do whatever the case may be. So it's always up to the meeting leader, who we're assuming for the most part is also the facilitator. But it's the facilitator's job to say, let's get this back on track, folks. Or this isn't the meeting we want to have right now. Or Mary, maybe we need to side table that for now. So it's the meeting leader doing that. Now, if I were in the middle of a 2-day event and my project manager, my junior project was learning from me, she might come to me and say, look, I need to control, you've been controlling it for a day. Can I take over and do that? I say, give it a shot. I mean, what do we have to lose? So I might hand the reins over a little bit on that, but it can be dangerous because I remember this just brought a memory back. I was teaching somewhere, this is about 10, 12 years ago, and I was asked to bring in a new instructor. And I taught the first day, and the second day she taught. And by break of the second day, the students came up and said, could you please take back over? So there's a danger, and she was offended because she felt like, well, you didn't give me enough chance. I was responding to the student request. So there's a danger there, but it really, to answer your question, the person in charge is running the meeting is the one who has to curtail the behavior. And Rich, I was wondering if do you want to give an example of a goblin and how we would deal with one?
Yes. First, I have to do a little promo for the book based on the conversation.
Please.
It's tied in. It's tied in,
Okay.
and that's the old book title was called "How to Facilitate Productive Project Meetings," which is literally won silver medal in the world's most boring book title. But it was about facilitation. It's about facilitation, and that's really what, as Jim said, we're writing this book to make you a better meeting facilitator, or to avoid having, and I should say, and to avoid having to hire a facilitator. So the book is actually a money saver because if you develop these skills, you won't have to hire a meeting facilitator, and you'll develop these skills which are useful all over the place. So to Jim's request, so we have these goblins. An example would be a naysayer, and I don't. Is it Nina? I can't remember what we call her now. But we have male and female goblins of various types, and one is this idea of a naysayer. And you've been at meetings like this. That'll never work, right?
We
Arms are
tried
closed.
that already.
We tried that last year. It doesn't work, right? When you get this body language.
Arm is folded.
right? Arms folded, permanent frown. And we actually have I think we have a comment in here that the pessimists are eventually always right.
Hmm.
Right? Are eventually always right. Right? This bridge will collapse. Maybe it will be 700 years, but this bridge will.
Right.
So this naysayer person is someone who's going to call everything into question, and it's going to It's going to bring the whole meeting down. In fact, I don't know if we don't allude to it because we want it to be international, but you could refer to Debbie Downer from Saturday Night Live.
We actually do.
We do? Okay.
Yep.
So what do you do with this person, right? You're the facilitator, and this person is actually, bringing the meeting's tone and atmosphere and the motivation to get this project work done down, because everything that people come up with, they're shooting it down. Right? They're shooting it down. So what do you do? Well, what you do is you tell the person that we really want this input. It's just not the right time because we're doing more of an open brainstorming now, and we're going to really need you when it comes to risk identification, because that's when we want these threats to be boarded, right? This could happen. This bad thing could happen.
Right.
And for another personal story, I worked in the Netherlands for 2 years, and you may know a little about Dutch directness. So the Dutch propensity, it's actually called low context culture, which we can talk about theoretically, but I'd rather be practical. Dutch folks tend to really, let's say they walk into your home and you've redecorated your living room, and you ask them, hey, what do you think? They'll go, this is ugly. Immediately. That literally makes us laugh, because as Americans, we tend to, what would we say? Let me ask Alinka. Let's do an experiment here. Let's do an experiment. Alinka, your neighbor.
Are you sure? I'm not from Canada originally.
Doesn't matter. You're not from the Netherlands. And you've been exposed to a lot of Americans. So your neighbor has redecorated their home thoroughly. The living room has been redone. The couch is yellow and purple with stripes and dots on it. The floor is shag carpet, harvest yellow. There's ugly velvet pictures on the wall. And what do you say? As an American, what do you say?
Well, let's go out for a coffee, probably.
You might say something like, wow.
But I like
That's very nice. It's interesting. By the way, to a certain extent, you just described Graceland. I was down at Graceland when they had green shag carpeting on the ceiling. They haven't changed it since Elvis died.
So
I guess I also think about, when you say something is ugly, that is your personal opinion, right?
It is.
So you can't generalize it. I mean, I'm assuming that, the Dutch would probably say it's ugly in their point of view. So then I wouldn't, you shouldn't necessarily be offended, because it's one opinion, right? Everything is
and Dutch folks will, I think, have a valid argument that that's what I think.
Right.
Like, take it or leave it. And that's what this naysayer thinks, right? Anyway, to me, most Americans, when I do this experiment, they say, oh, that's interesting, right? There's a little pause between that and interesting. Or they'll say, wow, creative choices, but they won't directly say,
no, we don't do that. We don't do that.
Americans tend not to do that. That's high context. But anyway, the point is, this naysayer is a very low context person, and they're going to constantly, Dutch or not, they're going to say, and by the way, this is not every Dutch person. It's a tendency that I noted from living there 2 years, and it's well documented as well. Anyway, this naysayer is not helping your meeting unless you tell them, look, hold these ideas. Actually, we really will need this when we do risk identification. And indeed, my Dutch colleagues were outstanding at finding everything that could go wrong in a project. It was almost depressing to be in the risk identification meeting. Well, this could happen, and this could happen, and last week this happened, but they know there's a time and a place for that. And what was amazing to me is that after those risk identification meetings, when they would, I'd be like, right. Every time they come up with something that was going to go wrong, I'd go further into a tailspin. When they were done, they felt great. And they said, okay, let's get this project done. I'm like, you just said 5,000 reasons why it's going to fail.
But what Rich did when he was describing how to deal with this particular goblin, he used a bit of a Jedi mind trick. So when they were talking about all these things, he spun it back to, well, those are not good things, but let's use it elsewhere. He didn't say to them, I don't want to hear your negativity. Let's bring that quote unquote negativity over here. And I would very much like those guys on a Challenger or a Columbia Gas or something that has really high risk or a drug. I would love those guys and gals in the room to tell me every possible thing that can go wrong, because the other side is people who say it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So,
And that over optimism can be a problem. And you can even say that to this person. We really need, you wouldn't say we need this negativity, but we really need this criticism, this critical view of our project, just not now, because the pace we're on now and the subject we're on now doesn't cover that.
and sometimes you got to take a person aside. We say in the book, I've had meetings where I've had to talk about something that was going wrong. We take a break, come back. 5 minutes later, it happens again. I take another break, and I get the person alone, and I say, "This isn't working out. The bullying behavior, the naysaying behavior. We need to do something about it. We need to talk about this one-on-one. I'm not trying to embarrass them in front of people. I try whatever. Unfortunately, I got to say, in my class, first of all, Rich and I, when we teach PMP, which includes Agile. A lot of guys try to be know-it-alls. There's no way they can know as much as we do from teaching it for 20 years, because we just have all crammed in our heads. So we don't get that many know-it-alls. Most of what I get is people who just maybe want to talk too much. That's easily handleable, because the people who do that already know they do it. I've never met a person who doesn't talk too much, that doesn't say, I talk too much, and then they proceed to do it. So you can, I'm working with a guy like that, and I got to sort of interrupt him. But I've had not too many occasions where I've had to shut down a meeting, or chastise someone or anything really bad. Maybe it's my own control of the situation, or I've been lucky. I don't know. So fortunately, I've run into all of these things, but I haven't been running to them. Maybe the people I'm seeing are well behaved. Although I will say, as and I'm using it in this example, teaching an example, one of the toughest places I've taught, not all over the world, some parts of Europe, all over the United States. And my experience is the toughest place to teach is right here in Boston, because people in Boston are highly opinionated and impatient. They raise their hands. What about risk? That's 5 slides now. What about procurement? That's 10 slides from now. Could you pass the test? I think I probably could. So they're very impatient and opinionated. Whereas when I went to New York, it was a lot easier. So I run into some of these things. But I do want to mention one thing. I want to pivot here a little bit if I can. We talked about goblin. Unless you have a question, I want to pivot to something that I think might be of interest, which has been on my mind since we started this. When Rich and Rich demonstrated a little bit earlier, somewhere in the text, Rich had written body language. And when I was reviewing it, I said, Rich, we need to talk about body language. He says, yeah, we're already talking about nonverbal communication. We have a chapter on them, but we need to talk about body language. Now, neither of us, I know, are body language experts. We're just not. So the disclaimer is that we're not body language experts. Other people are that have written books on it, one of which we quote in there, but we dipped our toe into it. We have a disclaimer saying, take this with a grain of salt, if you will. But if people are folding their arms, they could be cold, they could be resisting you, turning their back on you. So we talk in the book about nonverbal behavior, its importance, and the meaning of body language, which is what makes Zoom so difficult and this Air Meet so difficult, because we're seeing some body language, but it's completely different when you're in the room with people and you can see them fully. And when are they understanding? Are they frowning? Are they turning away from you? Are they on their cell phone? Those are important.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are skills that facilitators develop. Project managers will, to run their meetings, and like it or not, we have them. We have to have some of them. Some are online like this, and some are in, conference room 205. But and some are huge, and some involve customers, and some don't. We try to cover all of these different types of meetings as well. In fact, that's one of the segments. But body language can also be macro body language, like not going to the meeting at all, physically moving your whole body out. That's one form of body language, or where you sit in a room. Mm-hmm. And we actually have some of the science behind where, the different areas of seating near the room. Some of this is very cultural. In Japan, for example, there's very strong feelings about how the seating works. And if you're meeting with a company based in Japan, if you're traveling to Japan, there's a whole different layer of information, if you will, as to how the seating goes.
Not just the seating. We have a multicultural chapter. Rich lived overseas. I've worked overseas. We have war stories in the book from people. We solicit them from short war stories telling things that happened meetings, somebody who got lost in cyberspace. But Rich, tell a story about the guy with the business card in Japan. Was that yours?
Yes. Yes. So in Japan, the exchanging of business cards is ceremonial. I don't know, Alinka, have you been to Japan?
I haven't been. I've been to China though, and they have the
Okay.
same. They have a similar.
Very similar. So there's a way of presenting a business card with a bow and so forth. So I'll try to make this as short as possible. But we had a course in Japanese culture and language, and one of the teacher, and I still remember her name, Akiko Sano, told us that it's very, very important to deal with a person with your business card in a very ceremonial way. The business card is your essence. It is basically you. So when you hand this over, you're saying, "Here I am." Well, so she coached us, and this was at a large telecom, and we actually did have a meeting with Japanese officials. And I wasn't there, but she reflected the story. She traveled with them. And the room was a very long conference room with a polished mahogany table. And the Americans entered on one side of the room, and the Japanese entered on the other side of the room. And even after hearing this speech from Sano-san, our teacher, he could not resist the temptation. It was all men. He could not resist the temptation. He saw this shiny table. It just looked like a bowling alley to him. So he took his card and he flung it down the table, the length of the table, and it slid perfectly to the end where the Japanese were standing, jaws agape, because to them it looked like he had just flung himself on. This is a very formal meeting, and it looked like he had just done a belly flop onto the table and flung himself on the table. That's what it looked like to them. To him, he was just flinging his card. It was too tempting. But these kinds of things that are cultural, we do also cover in the book. That goes a little beyond meetings and goes into some more about just general culture. But we try to, again, these books are not thick. We have, even though we talk forever here, we keep these books so that it's concentrated. We put the good stuff, in here. And as Jim said, and I think it's really important, it's not just us. We have many, many people also of, we'll say, a slightly advanced age with a certain number of bruises and scrapes from actually being at meetings that haven't gone well, or that have gone really well, let's say out of the ordinary in either direction. And they have given us these really precious gems of stories that we've woven in through this. So we enjoy those. Some of them are pretty funny too.
You had asked Alanka about whether this is for other than project manager. The reason it's project in the title, because I'm not in what we do, but I have found in my years of consulting and teaching, a lot of project managers, first of all, they're accidental project managers. They sort of just become it because they're the next warm body. And when they come to a meeting or when they come to my classes, I can't even hear them speak. They're so soft spoken. And so I think, how can they possibly run a meeting? That's one thing that I think about. And so I remember years ago, and I thought about this. We put a little bit about this last minute in the book. We're still working on the final draft of it. But I went to communication skills class, not because anybody said you don't know how to communicate, because it was available. I went to Chicago, and I took a couple of days of communication class. People say, "Oh, you're jingling your keys in your pocket, or you're not doing this or that." And so I think people should learn, like the guy that I work with currently, smart guy, but he tends to sort of re-explain things. You ask him one question, he sort of re-explains the same concept. I said, I'm thinking he'd be a good teacher, but he needs to, be more focused in that. So I think just because somebody knows how to run a project, it doesn't transfer over to that they know how to run a meeting. And like I said, and even simple little things like this woman I was talking about who she's undynamic, losing people's interest. But another meeting, part of my job as a coach is to observe meetings, agile meetings, to make sure that they're adhering to agile principles. So I was on a call with a couple of the product owner, who's the person who's responsible for the entire product, and the scrum master. And the scrum master runs the meeting. So I went to one of the early meetings, and they're always complaining they don't have enough time. They're trying to shove multiple events into one meeting. But okay. So after the meeting, I went to them and said, "You ran out of time." They said, "Yes, we did." I said, "I have a recommendation for you." I said, "You spent the first 10 minutes waiting for everybody to show up. Why don't you start 1 or 2 minutes in? They'll learn that they got to show up. And immediately they did that. They got 8 minutes back into the meeting. So they're a lot crisper with the way but that wasn't a genius observation of mine. They just hadn't thought of it. It hadn't occurred to them that they didn't have to wait for everybody to show up. Some cultures do that. American culture, we don't. To wait for every single last straggler to come in because they're all coming from another meeting. Pick a time, start it. If they're not there, they'll catch up. So I think simple tips like that. And I want to pivot to one other thing that we already talked about a little bit, that we talked about virtual meetings. So a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago when we wrote the book, Rich and I had done virtual meetings, but we know a guy named Wayne Termel, and Wayne wrote a section for us on virtual meetings. Very good. Wayne knows all about that. My concern was the number of tools that were available. Here's what happened. The pandemic happened. Zoom, because it was there, I've been using it, but it really is there. There are tools like Miro, where you can move stickies around. I crave something where I can move stickies around. Miro does that. Mural has big landscapes. There's a tool called Claxoon that allows you to do retrospectives. So we talk about the fact that even though we want to be together physically in a room, if I have Zoom, if I go onto an Agile call, invariably they'll use Miro, Miro, for those who don't know it, to move things around, dot vote on things, move people into what they call lean coffees. We have breakout rooms. We vote on things. Although in person is by far the best and always will be, we now have a couple of years later, much greater virtual tools to work from. And Rich and I talk at some length about those, a whole chapter on that as well.
Yeah,
I think that's interesting for people too.
Yeah, and Wayne's chapter, that's definitely some added value in the book. Wayne was the cranky middle manager. That's his name. He had a great podcast. He's a comedian. He's a writer, but he's been studying and focusing on this. He wrote a book called The Long Distance Leader with his pal Kevin Eikenberry, and it's a great book. And I'd say some of the wisdom from that book has been injected into ours. And Wayne covers a broader audience, management in general, but he knows that we focus on project management, and he geared his comments that way.
I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do virtual. There are people that insist that you put your camera on. Some people are having a bad hair day. They don't want the camera on. They don't want to look at themselves. They don't want you to see them. A bad bald day, etc. And so, or they want you to be happy and peppy and doing cute little things. So I think there's an art to running virtual stuff and making sure that people, and there's such a thing as Zoom fatigue, they call it now.
Yes.
People get weary from the lack of certain cues and whatnot. So I think when Rich talks about it, the science behind some of these things is pretty interesting because it's a reality that people can get fatigued. I was watching an interview with a musician, and he said, "I'm used to on YouTube. I'm used to being interviewed in person. This Zoom thing just he couldn't even articulate it. He could articulate with his instrument, but he couldn't articulate what made him uneasy about being on Zoom." And frankly, at least we're now over the initial. Rich actually made the joke up front, the Brady Bunch thing. But every time you get in a call, oh, we're the Brady Bunch, and where do I look and where do I do that, right? Who's where? But I think beyond that, but I think virtual meetings are important. But Rich and I believe, and PMI says, and I think even the Agile Manifesto, or maybe one of the principles somewhere in there says, a face-to-face is the best. But this is a second distant cousin to that. It's
definitely better than texting. We talk about some of the misunderstandings that can take place with text, with email, with and trying to avoid email wars, things like this that happen just simply because people words have two meanings, or people fail to. Although this can be, as we will talk about shortly, Jim, people fail to italicize a word to show that that's where the stress is. And when I teach my class, I talk about the different ways you could say Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little lamb. Mary, not Jim, right? Mm-hmm. Mary had a little lamb. Oh, unfortunately, the lamb has moved on, right? Mary had a little lamb, right? There's only one. Right, so just simple sentence has different meanings each time you stress one of the words. The other part about virtual that I think is important And we're all doing a pretty good job here. All of the Bradys are doing a pretty good job. Um, the camera angle should be good. The lighting
Mhm.
should be decent.
Yeah.
The background should be good, not distracting. We've experimented with animated backgrounds, and in certain cases that can be fun, but often it's just distracting. But even well seasoned professors, I can say for sure from other universities, of course, have camera where the camera's looking up at them from below.
Right.
That's not
Right.
good. Or they're so far back that they're just a little dot,
Right.
or they're right in the
Or
camera.
too close. Uh-huh.
That's not good. So and audio is important as well. I've seen lecturers use just like an iPhone mic, or just an iPhone, and it costs what, just a small amount of money for a really good quality microphone. If you're going to be facilitating a lot of virtual meetings, spend a little
I
bit of money,
actually was.
$100.
I don't know how available I'm a LinkedIn Premium member. And on LinkedIn Premium, there's a video by a woman telling you how to get the best quality visual. Mine's pretty good, but one thing I did do, I have a light overhead and a light on either side. I have one of those round lights. So there's two sides of light. There's the window and overhead. I see some people who look like they're fantastic. Mine looks a lot better than used to because I spent a little bit of time, not a lot of money, a bit of time researching that. I've got an external camera and microphone that pick up pretty well. Don't need a headset, but I can use that if need be. Like if I'm teaching, I might put that on. But generally speaking, people want to, and you don't want to be distracted by the background. I mean, I got that sunflower back there. You're probably tired of looking at that, but you're not investigating my bookshelf and what is all. I do all the time. I see people on TV and there's something behind. I'm focusing the thing behind them a lot and not paying a lot of attention to what they're saying. So, or you can even blur the screen like Rich has done. So I think those things are important. I think we're beyond the I don't know how to use Zoom, right thing, or AirMeet or whatever it might be. We're really beyond that. People have to know how to communicate across this thing, and I don't know that people are necessarily investing the small amount of money that like Rich with his Edward R. Murrow microphone there. So
No one will get that reference.
no,
Well,
no, it's an American reference.
a few
Edward
people
R.
will.
Murrow was a 1950s broadcaster. I think he broadcast from Europe during World War II or something. He had a microphone that looked like Rich's, I believe. I think that's where Rich got it from, some
It's
old TV studio.
it's a
The
throwback look,
audio
but
was
it was it was inexpensive. It was inexpensive.
Right.
So let's talk a bit about some of the things we do in the book. One of the things we do is we have a case woven
Oh,
into
yeah.
the book a little bit. It's about building a house. It's actually a little storyline of a political candidate who is building a greenhouse, not a greenhouse, but a
Greenhouse.
environmentally responsible home because she's run on a platform.
Rich and I
for-
have solar panels in our houses. We are
yeah,
green.
that's true too. But she's running a project. She's running a political campaign, which is a project, and so she's trying to live her truth. And she's building this house that's environmentally responsible, and so she needs meetings. So we weave that in and try to make this interesting. It would be easy to write a book that just says this is how you run a meeting, but that would that defeats this whole purpose. That meetings are a form of communication.
Mhm.
And you need to make them fun and interesting and engaging. You need to invite the right people at the right time. And there are times when it absolutely positively makes no sense to have the meeting in the first place. That could be done with one email.
Right.
And then there are other times when emails flying back and forth. And you know what? Sorry, you need a meeting.
Right. Or a phone call, something.
Something where you bring human beings together to use. Yes, you need to bring human beings together, perhaps with donuts, to talk over a subject where they can see and hear each other and understand that Mary had a little lamb.
And it turns out the people you're emailing are 3 cubes away from you and you're emailing back and forth. Why don't we just get together in this office and talk about it? You just can't beat that. But
Knock it out. Just
yeah,
get it
yeah,
out.
bang it out. Virtual is fine. Texting, we're going a little afield of what we talk about. We do to some extent, but I had a recent experience where I was working with a couple of guys on a sort of off project thing. Another guy added a bunch of people to a text chain who we didn't even know. I thought to myself, this is going to go south, and I went badly south. It went badly downhill, and we're up with some acrimonious comments because people misunderstood each other. They're making comments. Somebody said something else. There weren't any smiley faces, and it went downhill. So it's so easy for that to happen, especially when people don't know each other. And you know what it's like when people communicate on comment sections. They say something and somebody misunderstands it. We're not anti-texting by any means. It's appropriate. I even use it in work if I have to. But we also use things like Teams, right? And by the way, things like Teams and Slack can be fine if don't have to meet per se. So if I'm just sort of, do I have to meet? No, let's exchange a few Teams messages or Slack messages. If we're not on the same page, we realize that what we have here is failure to communicate, then time to jump on a phone call. Right, Rich?
Yeah, I think Jim and I have a 3-word philosophy. It also applies to this unnecessary argumentation that goes on between different forms of agile and so forth. Agile versus, different forms of agile versus waterfall. And this is better. This is better. The 3 words are use what works.
Right.
Just use what works. Right. It's the same for meetings. If a virtual meeting will get the job done,
Sure.
use it. But don't have a meeting because it's scheduled. That is the
Right.
world's worst. That's the world's, unless it's a stand-up meeting and it's short and it's terse and you get the point across. Scheduling and then running 1.5-hour meetings every Wednesday when they're not needed. The thing is, we will fill the time. You saw how Jim and I did it. There was no questions for us. There was no dialogue set beforehand, and we could go on and on and on. And partially because we teach, and that will happen in meetings, especially if there's 1 or 2 garrulous Garys there, in the meeting.
And you know what I was just thinking? That we talk about being large and in charge. That's the expression I wanted to get out there, and not worrying about whether people like you. That doesn't mean being a jerk. But even in some other things, I belong to the Agile Alliance, which is just a Agile nonprofit, like $40 a year or whatever. And they have what they call a lean coffee. And the lean coffee is just come in, they bring up a Kanban board, you go into breakout rooms, and you vote on everything that people want to talk about. I went into a room, this is just 2 days ago, with about half a dozen other people from all over the world. And I just sort of instantly took charge because I know if I didn't, people don't. They'll sit there and wait for something to happen. I'll say, well, nobody put me in charge of the room. I'll just say, hey, everybody, we have this board here. Anybody have any ideas about what? And they start writing ideas down. Why don't we discuss this one? So maybe I naturally do it because I'm used to leading meetings and stuff. But I know from so many experiences that if I didn't do that, we'd all sit there for 10 minutes waiting for somebody to take charge. It doesn't mean I'd be the leader of a team or the foreman of the jury, but I know enough on those impromptu ad hoc things. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody wants somebody to do it, and then the ball gets rolling. So to your earlier question, Alenka, who owns the room? It's the person facilitating. And by the way, I have it somewhere, a whole book of facilitation. There are people that give certification facilitation. We don't do that, but just it's not we make any money off of. But you can go places, learn facilitation techniques, and get certified in it. I know a lot of people who have that, but the ability to facilitate, when you talk about things that are in demand, there's a great shortage of project managers worldwide, as PMI reports, a great demand for them. And they don't just ask for people who can use Microsoft Project or who know Jira. They want people who can communicate, people who can run meetings, people who can talk to stakeholders, people who don't get angry easily. They want all those skills, a lot of the soft skills, and communication is, I think, one of the big ones that Rich or I would look for if we're hiring somebody. I don't want somebody who says, I'm great at Microsoft Project and I'm great at Jira. How are you talking to stakeholders? How are you running a meeting? I want to see evidence of that. I think those are extremely important. And by the way, I didn't have them. I'm actually an introvert. It took me a long time to learn how to stand up on a stage and talk to people and make it seem interesting, or even do what I'm doing now. But it's a learned skill, and I think more people need it. But to our audience we're talking about, they really need, as Rich says, at least the leadership skills. You just feel more confident when you can run a meeting of your peers or even senior managers and come away from that and they praise you on job well done. It means well for your career. It makes you feel better about that. And it does build great teams.
Yes. And a good way to summarize this is that PMI changed the name, to Power Skills, right? Yeah. Power Skills is now the name. Soft skills sounds like they're squishy and unnecessary and something that you might use to stuff a pillow, right?
Right.
Instead, power skills, these are the things that give you an advantage. And as I say in my class, and I use a reference to the Flight of the Conchords. I don't know if you know the comedy troupe, group of 2, but there's a song they sing, but I use an image of them, and I said the robots are coming. There's AI will be able to do scheduling and planning,
Mm,
but it won't be able to deal with Josephine's problems at work because she's having problems at home, or Ken is having
right.
problems at home, and it takes a human being. Actually, one of my colleagues, Dr. Dave Silberman, will actually use a single word to stop a meeting that is kind of too robotic. He'll go, humans. That we're humans, we're human beings. We have feelings, we have reactions, and we should take that into account. Those are skills, as Jim said, that people that we would look for on top of the ability to use Microsoft Project and
Or whatever.
to plan and
Well,
schedule. Yes.
PMI has a thing called they call the talent triangle. That only came into being. That's part of the ones Rich is talking about. What PMI found, because they do surveys regularly, is that managers are saying, "Great, you sent me a PMP, and he or she can run a project. They have no strategy skills. They have no soft skills. I need you to work on that." Unfortunately, well, it's the best they can maybe do. The way PMI tries to get people to have that is to not only read about it, but also you've got to get professional developing units in it. So I think you got 8 each in power, strategy, and I forget what the third one is, but along those lines within triangle doesn't mean you're great at that. At least you're aware of that. And I think, but it doesn't matter how you get them, because managers will find out pretty quickly that you're too shy to run a meeting. Shyness doesn't work very well in corporate America or corporate anywhere, or even academia. I think it's fun. It's okay if you're a wallflower. When it comes to the meeting, you got to step up. You got to deliver. You got to be large and in charge. And you go home and be shy if you want. But shyness doesn't work, or meekness doesn't work. And I'm not talking about bullying. I'm talking about leadership. And I think that's what Rich is right. This is a leadership skill, and leadership skills are needed. That's what they want. They don't want followers. They don't want people who can say, "Boy, can I make things happen with Microsoft Project or Jira?" That's nice, but can you talk to people? That's one of the
I think
lacking skills.
I think there's a lot to talk about, and I think we need another episode.
Yeah, we're done. We're done. Huh? Are there?
With
Should we
both
answer
of you,
if
but
there's any questions, or what do we do? Are we done?
I just wanted to give you a few minutes to talk about the book, because it's going to be launched and just kind of let
July.
us know when. July this year.
It's going to be out in July. We don't have an exact date. Say middle of July. Anyway. It's up on Amazon now for pre-order. And Rich will remind me of the title.
The publisher
is BEP.
BEP, Business Expert Press. The title is Great Meetings Build Great Teams. And then the subtitle is A Guide for Project Leaders and Agilists.
You can always look in books, seriously, books on Amazon under Maltzman, because you come up, your name is a little more unique than mine. You scroll down a few, you'll find the book. It's pre-order is there, and people want it. Great. Rich and I, we don't get rich. No consultant. We didn't write the next Who Moved My Cheese. That'll be the next one. Who Moved My Watermelon or something. But all we expect is that people who need it might read it. We might go to shows and talk about that. But we really hope that people just get better at running meetings, because a rising tide floats all boats. But that's the book.
Yeah.
No, but you gave us a teaser.
It's inexpensive. It's a soft cover. No, I wish I had it. It's coming in July. If I had it now, I would be betting on sports events, because I would have no. We have a proof. The proof is ready, and then it's going to be printed and available in July.
Right.
A question?
No. Okay. So people, if people pre-order it right now, they will get it once it's launched, right?
They don't even charge you, I believe, until it's launched. That you just get in the queue for it.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good approach to start pre-ordering, and after this 1 hour of teaser of things that are coming in from that book, I think that you may not want to get rich, but maybe you will. Because
we actually have ordered the yacht, but maybe it's premature. We don't know.
Yes, we always talk about the yacht. It's going to be, what it's actually going to be is a bathroom floating toy, and that's about as far as what we're going to get. As I like to tell people, when you write books, like this that are meant to help people in a particular field, as opposed to like Michelle Obama's book, you can make tens of dollars,
Right.
tens of
Absolutely.
dollars.
Easily. I put a link in there, but I don't know if it went anywhere, so I can't. Sometimes the air meat mystifies me a little bit, but I try to put a link in. Or
Yeah,
maybe
you put the
not.
whole.
What do you?
You can actually one of the little tips for those who are sharing Amazon links. You can cut off everything after the slash that says ref equals, because that's all SEO stuff. So if you slice off the rest of that link after 752,
Did it
Yeah.
come through, Rich? Did it come through?
the link came through. What I'm saying is that's carrying forward all the stuff for how did you search for the book and where did you
Oh,
find it,
right.
and so you can shorten the link
So you can
significantly.
turn it
Oh,
off.
by the way, since we're mentioning that, the book has an online component, so to speak. We will have templates and some suggestions in a FTP site provided by BEP. So
Right.
you get the book, and you also get access to templates for agenda, for communication matrices, things like this that we've provided as well.
Well, that's awesome.
So it's a treasure trove.
Is there also a Nina template? A template for Nina or the
For
Nair?
who?
For the
Oh,
Nair.
for the naysayer.
The Nair.
We don't have a goblin template, but we should say that we don't just mention the goblins and say here they are. There is a paragraph or two devoted to each one,
Strategies.
describing what they are, and then what should you do about this specific steps.
None
Literally,
of them say ignore it. None of them say ignore their behavior.
yeah. So we aren't the kind of authors that say, yeah, these problems exist. We're saying these problems exist, and here are some solutions for you.
How about having those secret traps under their chairs?
The nuclear option. We don't talk about that.
Like the Russian roulette.
Russian roulette.
I don't think we haven't thought of that too. You know what? I know we're near the end. The toughest person I personally have found to deal with is the passive aggressive person, because it's so subtle.
Yeah.
The way of ignoring you or saying yes but meaning no. Other people are out there. Passive aggressive people are subtle, and there's not a few of them. And as I like to say, there are people who haven't changed much since high school, and they bring their high school behavior to the workplace. And so,
and that's when you combine that with a negative, you combine that with a naysayer, you end up with this. Yeah, that's going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's the passive aggressiveness, and that is very difficult to deal with. I think that's one of those cases, like Jim said, where you have to have as we would call it here in Massachusetts, a sidebar.
Yeah.
A sidebar. See, it hurts me to make that sound as a New Englander, but a sidebar conversation with that person and say that's counterproductive, Bill, or whoever's doing that. That's counterproductive. If you have these comments, I'm glad to talk with you about them one-on-one. But if you have a sarcastic remark, it's not, it's in limitation at best. Use it in a limited fashion at best.
Right. So,
Yes.
are we there? Are we there yet?
We are there yet.
Okay.
How if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that? Maybe they have follow-up questions.
That's a good question. I'll put my and Rich can do so as well. Address.
Just LinkedIn.
Either way, yeah. If they want to ask a question, I can come up with that faster. I can come up with my LinkedIn. It's probably a million Jim Stewart's, but there's my email address. Happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, I would say just look.
Did you put it in the chat?
Did I? I put it somewhere. I put it in messages.
It came to me.
To you.
It came to me. Jim, thank you. I have your email address.
Oh, I know.
Thank goodness. All these years.
I know. You've been trying to duck me for all this time.
Anyway, at least I'm making a Lincoln laugh.
Here we go. Let's see. I'm trying it again.
LinkedIn.
Email address is so long. If you hit fat finger, you're out of luck.
I'm sure people can find you on LinkedIn as well.
Let's try this one. Any better? It's just like not going anywhere on the other one. So sorry. Anyway, it's Jay Stewart
okay.
at Stewart Consulting.com.
Did those come through? I don't know if they came through, but
I,
Yeah,
you can post
yeah,
you
yours
can
came
post
through
these
it.
also on the YouTube link and on
right.
your
Good
own
point.
link.
Yeah.
We'll have them. We got you. We'll have them posted, and
Okay.
your names are very well known in our industry, so I'm sure people will easily find you. And if by any means not, they will reach out to me, and I can help them out. So no
What
problem.
we seriously do look forward to, although we don't count on this to be honest, but what we look forward to would be some an organization, maybe the U.S. government or small organization like that, standardizing on this book for its meetings, right? And I'm sort of half kidding that there are some. I think if an organization thrives on meetings or dies by meetings and it needs some improvement, of course we'd like the idea that they would just kind of make this semi-required reading for
Why don't you do that? Be you. You have the ability to do that.
I
Boston
do, but I never specify my own books. But I
Every
could do it. You
professor
know
does.
what? I could do it for our faculty meetings. I have to tell you,
Every professor recommends their own book.
faculty meetings can be dreadful. They can be dreadful. So I try to
So
bring
that would
some
be
of
a
that.
good.
I try to bring some of that here, some of the levity. And again, you've seen us joke around. It's serious. It's serious business. That levity and comedy, if done right, makes for a much more smoothly flowing meeting. It makes for more camaraderie, and it's a really really helpful tool. If it's done well, it can really make the meeting seem like it's 20 minutes when it's an hour long. Now this meeting, because it was Jim and I, was an hour long. It's going to seem like 7 to 8 hours to most
Right,
people.
exactly. You can always go back and watch it again if you're so excited. So,
And that will be available. The recording will be available right after we close the session. So,
okay,
and it's I will send you the YouTube link as well if you want to share it with others,
great.
or if you want to rewatch it for the remainder of the day.
Over and
But
over and over.
it was a pleasure having you both,
Yeah, great.
and we hope to see each other again. Maybe after the launch of your book.
Yeah, love to come back.
Congratulations, and may it all go really really well. May it not become a floating item or may it be a floating item, but also a useful floating item.
Great. We
And
shall see. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Alenka.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
I'll see you soon,
thank
Rich.
you both.
Bye.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.